r/NoSleep. Posted by u/Deep Television 9794. What's the scariest moment you've encountered in your whole life? I used to live near a large open stormwater drain with no fencing around it. 3 drunk guys drove their car straight into it. I went out and found the driver trying to get his friend's foot out of the windshield. On the field on other side of the drain I saw the third passenger who was covered in blood. I asked if they were okay and my neighbor called the ambulance/police. The blood-covered friend passed out and was twitching, so I ran to the car, grabbed a towel from the back seat and ran to help him. I found a large, deep cut on the back of his neck/head. I rolled him to his back and used the weight of his head to put pressure on the wound. I was talking to him, trying to keep him awake, and he went into shock, twitching and unresponsive. This was the moment I thought a man died in my hands. I was able to wake him and the ambulance took over from there. That was the most harrowing moment of my life. I used to be a mountaineer, and I was on an expedition on Aconcagua, the tallest mountain in the Americas. We were at Camp 3, around 6,000 meters at altitude, and set to push for the summit in the morning. I'd been feeling a bit nauseated and sluggish that day, but nothing too alarming. But I woke up in the middle of night and something was horribly wrong. My head felt it was split open, I couldn't stop vomiting, dry heaving, and I was talking gibberish. The world was upside down to me. I felt overheated even though it was approaching 50 degrees with the wind chill. I don't remember much of that night, but I had a bit of clarity once my teammate injected me with a steroid used to combat altitude sickness. I was told I was developing high-attitude cerebral edema and I would die if I didn't descend. The problem was that a massive blizzard had come in. Even without the storm, helicopters could not get me. By morning, the storm had lessened a bit and a guide from another team heard what had happened. He agreed to help me get down the mountain. But within an hour, the storm was raging again. I lost in the snow for a while and my body was depleted of energy. I slumped down into a snowdrift, realizing I was going to die. I wasn't scared then, but felt a calm peacefulness. Thank God something eventually kicked in, some sort of survival instinct, and the sheer terror of the situation hit me hard. Thank God my guide followed my tracks, gave me more medicine, and over the next 7 hours, made our way down. The fear hit me really badly that night in base camp. That realization that I should be dead is harder to describe. I got severe sun, high altitude is weird, and wind burns on my face, lost chunks of my cheeks for a while. I now have signs of having a TBI from my brain swelling. I still love the mountains, but I hike instead of mountaineer. My life is too precious now. When I was 13 I was staying at a hotel in New York with my family and decided to get some hot chocolate in the lobby. When I went back to the elevator there was already a man in it holding the door for me. He had pressed the button for a different floor than mine and I pressed my floor. The whole time in there he was just staring at me. When the elevator stopped at my floor I got out. The man waited, but I had a weird feeling and noticed he had gotten out too, which immediately made me suspicious. I contemplated throwing my hot chocolate at him but decided to just run to my parents' room. When he saw me knocking on the door he went back in the elevator. Thinking back, I was extremely lucky that the hotel had open floors where each floor sort of looks down on the lobby. I'm sure if it was more closed he would have done something. When I was a kid in 1973, I went fishing with my brother and cousin. We had to cross a low water bridge over the creek. It started raining pretty hard, and after a while we thought we'd better head back. By this time, water was about hip deep over the bridge we had to cross back over, and it was really churning. We looked around and found a long branch that we all held onto as we crossed. About halfway across, I lost my footing, and fell in, still holding on. This caused my cousin to fall in, and so my brother was left holding onto the branch with both of us in the water. In the meantime, our older sister showed up and found my brother's parked motorcycle, with water now inching up the spokes. We couldn't hear anything but the roar of the swollen creek. A couple of police officers were now looking on. Sister, all 90 pounds of her, decided she'd better rescue us, so she came from her side of the bridge. When she got to us, the water swept her off, but she grabbed onto the branch, and at this point brother is holding onto the branch with all 3 of us. We're beyond panic in what was definitely a flash flood. If we let go, we'd be swept down the rocky creek bed to God knows where. We struggled to hang on. The cops finally removed their gun belts and came to our rescue. I really thought I was going to die that day. My brother was a hero. When my son was born, C-section, he stopped breathing. The doctors managed to revive him. It felt like 5 minutes of sheer panic, but in reality it was more like 30 seconds. I have the whole thing on video. I was recording when they lift him above the sheet and forgot to press stop on the recording. I watched the video back a couple of years later and you can hear the panic in my voice. I asked the nurse if he was going to be okay and she said she doesn't know. Luckily 9 years later he's a very healthy happy boy. Edit, wow, I didn't expect that many upvotes and replies. A little more on this and why it actually happened. My partner is type 1 diabetic and towards the end of pregnancy the baby started to take more insulin resulting in him growing rapidly from week 33. We then had to go for regular ultrasounds to determine when was best to get him out. Size was an issue as my partner is only 5 feet 2 inches and slim, but they didn't want to deliver him too early as he wouldn't be fully developed. He ended up being delivered by C-section on week 36 and weighed 7 lbs 11 oz. Basically he was too big to be inside my partner and they had to get him out. His lungs weren't quite developed yet so he had to go on a ventilator for 11 days, after that he was fine and hasn't had any lung/breathing related issues since. He plays a lot of sports now too and it has never affected him. We are actually having another baby boy in 9 days time. This time we have managed to reach week 38 as my wife has managed her glucose levels much better this time so he is growing at a normal rate so hopefully this time there will be no complications. I was on final approach to a local airport and had chosen runway 26 to land because that's what you are supposed to do at this particular airport, unless the wind favors another runway. There was a 3-knot tailwind and I should have landed the opposite direction on runway 8 but I thought what the hell, I can basically fly straight in and it's only 3 knots. I'm running low on fuel and I'm a student pilot flying solo so I don't want to fly around the airport, I just want to get down and fill up. I get down to about 20 feet from the runway and all of a sudden I feel a gust of wind pick me up from behind and the nose immediately points down. My lift is gone so I'm basically falling to the ground. I instinctively yank back on the yoke but there's no air flowing over the elevator so I hit nose wheel first, and I thought the propeller hit too but somehow it didn't, and sort of bounced forward into a precarious position where the left side wheel and nose wheel are touching the ground and my right wheel is still 2 feet in the air. It looked like the left wing might drag on the ground if I didn't just front flip onto the runway. Not really sure how that ended up settling, I guess the wind just died down. Next thing you know I'm stopped on the runway and the airplane is violently shaking. I'm thinking I bent the prop shaft, and I'm violently shaking, adrenaline, and I rev up the engine a little to get going and get off the runway. The engine ended up running smoothly after a few seconds and the shaking stopped. Unsure about what just happened and how the airplane could possibly be okay, I taxied to the fuel pump and shut down. It took me a few hours after I refueled, calming myself down and then building up the courage to get back in the airplane and fly home. It is a 15-minute flight back to my home airport and I did the whole thing white-knuckled and quivering. But I'm glad I did. I ended up having a great landing and had I not gotten back on the horse that day I may have never got my license. Still though, that moment when I lost control and all I could see out of the windshield was runway. Scariest moment of my entire life. My wife and I were backpacking in a semi-remote area with our dog. We made camp and swam in a nearby river for a while before making dinner. As we're eating, our dog starts barking and I look up to see a guy walking down a hillside toward our camp. As he comes closer I see that he's visibly tweaking. He's not wearing a shirt and around his neck he's wearing a double coil of thick chain attached with a combination master lock. At his waist he has a Japanese-style katana, but the hilt/handle has been replaced with a large elk antler. I walk over to see what he wants and my usually friendly dog is going crazy barking and growling at him. He won't make eye contact with me and keeps stealing glances at my wife. We're in the middle of nowhere and he tells me he's looking for a place to set up camp and he has some friends coming up. He mentions something about a goat but he's mumbling so I don't really catch it. I say okay and he starts looking around where we're camped and says this looks like a pretty sweet spot. He turns around and starts walking around the area. He then pulls out the katana and starts hacking branches off trees. This isn't some prop katana. It's hacking off 3 branches in one fell swoop. My hair is standing on end and my gut tells me not to stick around to see how this movie ends. He tells us he's going to mark the main trail so his buddies know where to come down and find him. As soon as he leaves we immediately pack up our shit and hike out 8 miles in the dark. On the way out we have our headlamps on, walking down a single-track trail. We come around a corner and a guy in a white tank top sees us, turns around and bolts down the trail back the way he came from in the direction we're walking. I'm extra weirded out now. We round a curve and he's standing there breathing heavy. My headlamp catches his face and he's smiling. I pause and tell him we're just hiking out. He smiles again, looks at our dog and says nice puppy. We sidle past him and pass a large cooler that he was obviously dragging up the trail. No idea what was in it, but it definitely had been used to store bloody meat at some point as the outside was covered in old dry blood. No idea what would have happened, but I imagined them camped next to us in the middle of nowhere, asking us to party with them. My dad always told me to trust my gut, and I'm glad I did. This happened when I was a child visiting my mom's very rural province with the fam. It's a very rustic town, and our house there was this creepy old Spanish colonial style house. I was hanging out with some of my cousins and other old peeps. Then they told me about the Manananggal. Basically, it's a winged creature that's akin to a vampire, but it leaves a part of the body from the waist down, flying with only its top half. Its favorite food is unborn children from pregnant ladies. How she eats is that she lands on a house, find a crevice on the ceiling. Old houses in the area are basically dried nipple leaves or old-style tiles, and uses her thin, hose-like tongue to slither its way down to a person's belly button, and discreetly suck the nutrients on an unsuspecting person. Pretty scary stuff, and the tone of the village and the sincere belief of the old peeps really help sell the story. Now this is where the fun begins. I was sleeping in a room with my whole fam, and I'm not sure about the time, but a noise woke me up deep into the night. Everyone was still sleeping, and considering the family dynamics of an East Asian family, I am in no position to open the lights and wake up my parents. Then I hear it. Something freaking landed on the roof. And whatever it is, it's definitely alive because it's moving. Maybe two cats having a rumble? The noise was too big and spread out. Troll neighbors? We were on the second floor, and if you pulled shit like that, the small town would definitely ostracize you. Think skateboarding in a town of Karens. The noise isn't waking my family, and it rumbled slowly towards our room. When the noise moved on top of our room, it stopped. That's definitely a Manananggal. I was too frozen in fear to do anything that I couldn't even scream. My mom was definitely not preggers, so what the fuck? I was just there lying on the bed, waiting to see what happens. Waiting for a hose-like tongue to come into view. I heard another short rumble. And then there was silence. Was it gone? My eyes were open, up until the sun rose. During breakfast, my older cousin asked me why I looked so sleep-deprived. I didn't want to sound crazy, so I just told him a loud noise last night kept me awake. Oh, you heard that too? I think that earthquake made some coconuts roll off the roof. Aside from my scariest experience, that was also my first bro moment. I was traveling home to California and I was in Nevada. It was an emergency, so I'd packed and left at around midnight. It was about 5:30 am or so in rural Nevada. I was at a stop on my usual route. I was very familiar with the particular stop, and it was just an hour or so before the California border. Being a lone female, I concealed carry. I have my extended permit which allowed concealed through several states, except California, and I was at my truck at an empty spot, and I was in the cab disassembling and putting away my gun to be in compliance. Stepped out to go to the restroom and someone had managed to get close to my truck and was hiding along the passenger side, and I didn't know it until I'd walked past them. Whoever it was grabbed me from behind. I let out the loudest, most blood-curdling scream. Oscar-winning scream. But there was no other people at this stop. I fought and tried to buck the guy off of me, but I wasn't doing very well. Kicking led him to lift me off the ground where I couldn't get him, and trying to break through his arms made him bend me over with him still behind me. I'm not sure how long I was screaming and fighting, but then I heard tires screech and I figured it was the creepy van my parents told me to avoid as a kid coming to take me away. Nope. It was a Toyota Corolla full of local teenagers headed to the gas station before school. The teens jumped out and ran towards us, and the driver stayed in the vehicle. The guy who grabbed me took off, two of the kids chased him through the desert beyond the gas station on foot, and the driver and the other kid made sure I was alright. I send these 4 boys Christmas and birthday cards every year. I'm sure if it wasn't for them I would have been kidnapped or killed. Josh, Austin, Mason, and James, thank you guys.